Can enlightenment be taught, or must it be lived, experienced, and suffered through? Siddhartha follows one man's inner journey toward that answer. Siddhartha is the intelligent son of a respected Brahmin. Though admired and educated, he feels an unfulfilled longing within. He leaves behind comfort and certainty to seek truth on his own. Siddhartha practices severe asceticism and encounters the Buddha himself. Yet he chooses not to follow even the perfect teaching. He believes truth cannot be transferred through words alone. It must be personally lived. Siddhartha enters the world. He experiences wealth, desire, love, and pleasure. At first, life feels rich and complete, but soon, emptiness and exhaustion take over. Even in pleasure, he loses himself. At the edge of despair, Siddhartha settles by a river. There he meets Vasudeva, a ferryman who teaches him the art of listening. The river reveals that time is an illusion. All moments coexist, and joy and suffering cannot be separated. Siddhartha's awakening is not escape. Asceticism, pleasure, failure, all are embraced as part of life. Wisdom is not division, but integration. Siddhartha speaks powerfully to a modern world obsessed with improvement. It suggests that truth may come not from better answers, but from deeper experience. Now, let's explore how Siddhartha's journey offers insight into modern self-discovery, spiritual growth, and the courage to live one's own path in a world full of prescribed answers.
For about 100 years now, Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha has been this go-to guide for anyone on a spiritual quest. And, it's a really short book, but man, does it dive into one of the biggest, toughest questions we all face in life.
And Hesse just cuts right to the chase with this one. Single, powerful idea. He says, wisdom cannot be passed on. Wisdom which a wise man tries to pass on to someone always sounds like foolishness. I mean, think about that for a second. That's the huge paradox that fuels this entire story.
So that really begs the question, right? And it's the big one we're going to tackle here. If you can't be taught wisdom, then how in the world are you supposed to find it?
Okay, so to really get Siddhartha's quest, we first have to look at the guy who wrote it, Hermann Hesse. See, this wasn't just him making up a story. No, he was wrestling with his own life, his own journey.
Yeah, Hesse wasn't just sitting in an ivory tower. I mean, look at this timeline. It shows you the incredible pressure he was under. First in 1911, he goes to India searching for spiritual answers. Then bam, World War I hits. And that experience just completely deepens his disillusionment with the Western world. So when Siddhartha comes out in 1922, you've got to understand it's a direct product of all that personal and political turmoil.
And this quote, it just nails his mindset perfectly. He talked about Occidental misery, this feeling that the West was all about reason and technology, while the East was where you'd find religion. He just had this gut feeling that the West was missing something vital. And his writing, that became his way of trying to find.
All right, so that brings us to the main man himself, Siddhartha. We're in section 2 now, rejecting taught knowledge. And this is key, because Siddhartha's real journey, it doesn't start until he just walks away from everything he's ever been told to believe.
So Siddhartha's early life is basically a series of rejections. First, he leaves his cushy home. Then he joins these ascetics, the samanas, to practice some pretty extreme self-denial. He even gets to meet the actual Gautama Buddha. But here's the kicker. Even though he has immense respect for the Buddha, he decides not to follow him. He comes to this powerful conclusion that real enlightenment, it just can't be handed to you by someone else. And he says it so clearly himself. I want to learn from myself, want to be my student, and want to get to know myself, the secret of Siddhartha. I mean, wow, that is a radical declaration of independence both intellectually and spiritually. He's basically decided that his own life, his own experience, that's going to be his only teacher, his only textbook.
This whole idea really sets up the central conflict of the story, this big difference between seeking and finding. Seeking is all about looking outside yourself for answers, following the rules and paths someone else made. But finding, well, that's an inside job. It's about creating your own path, just by living your life. And Siddhartha makes this incredibly bold choice to stop seeking and to just start finding. So if he's done with seeking, what's next? Where does he go from here? Well, that brings us right to section 3, the path of experience. He has this massive realization that if he really wants to understand life, he can't run away from the messy, material world. He has to dive in, head first.
And oh boy, does he dive in. He learns about the art of love from a courtesan named Kamala. He learns about business and making money from a merchant, Kamaswami. But all this indulgence, all this stuff, it doesn't make him happy, not at all. In fact, it leads him to this deep, dark place of emptiness, a spiritual despair that, ironically, becomes its own kind of teacher.
You know, this whole journey is almost a perfect example of what we call existentialism. The core idea here is that the world doesn't just hand us meaning on a silver platter. So, it's up to us. We're totally free and totally responsible for creating our own purpose. And Siddhartha, he's the poster child for this, taking complete ownership of his path, even when it takes him to his absolute lowest point.
And speaking of that lowest point, that's what brings us to Section 4, Wisdom from the River. This right here is the major turning point in the whole story. It's where hitting rock bottom actually becomes the spark for real, true insight.
So there he is, at his absolute lowest, actually thinking about ending it all, right by a river. But then he starts to listen to it, really listen, and he starts to get it. The river becomes this incredible, central symbol in the book. It represents how everything in life is connected, how it's all part of one timeless flow. It's constantly changing, but at its core, it's always the same.
And it's here that he meets this simple ferryman, a guy named Vasudeva. Now, Vasudeva isn't a teacher in the old sense. He doesn't give sermons or lectures. He's more of a guide, someone who shows Siddhartha how to listen. And just by watching him, Siddhartha learns these incredibly profound lessons. How to wait, how to be patient, and how to just listen, really listen, to all the different voices of the river, which are all saying the same thing. Everything is one.
So how does this all wrap up? How does it all come together? That brings us to our final section, finding the authentic self. This is it. This is the grand finale, where Siddhartha finally pulls together a lifetime of all these different and honestly often contradictory experiences into one whole. And we can actually look at this final stage through a modern lens, using a psychological concept called self-actualization. It was pioneered by a guy named Carl Rogers, and it's all about reaching your full, unique potential. And check out the key traits. Being open to new experiences, living completely in the moment, which Rogers called existential living, and trusting your own gut. Does that sound like anyone we know? It's pretty amazing when you break it down. You can see how each part of his life built one of these key traits. That early spiritual phase, that taught him to be open to new experiences. His time in the city, his earthly life, that forced him into that existential living mode, constantly adapting. And finally, learning from the river, that taught him to trust his own experience, what Rogers would call a belief in the self-organism. It all comes together. He's finally integrated every single piece of his wild journey. So we started this whole thing with that one big idea: wisdom can't be taught. And now, after following Siddhartha through all his ups and downs, we land on Hess's simple but incredibly powerful conclusion. Knowledge is taught. Wisdom is lived.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. The big takeaway from this book is that our greatest teachers might not be people at all. So I'll leave you with this question. What teacher in your life isn't a person, but an experience?